Hi everyone. So today's discussion is about the long run aggregate supply curve. In this, we will discuss the classical versus the Keynesian debate, how classical and Keynesians have a disagreement about the shape of the LRAS curve, which is basically coming about because of the reason that they both have a disagreement, which is about unemployment in the long run. So we'll discuss the view about unemployment in the long run, and we will also talk about something called the flexibility of wages, which is another point of disagreement, which is between the classical and the Keynesian school of thought. And this disagreement leads to a different kind of curve for the classical and the Keynesian school of thought. So let's start off with our discussion. So in the long run, basically an economy's supply of goods and services depends on what we call the supply of its inputs like capital, labor, and other available production technology used to produce these goods and services. So how the amount of input will decide basically the amount of output you have, and that makes sense because all these land, labor, capital, enterprise kind of like become like a limit to your productive potential. So we say this, that there is a limit to how much a firm can increase their supply, and or an economy can increase the supply in the long run, and that's because you have a limit to the inputs available to you. Now, when you look at the long run aggregate supply curve, according to the classical view, the classical school of thought is saying that LRAS is just a vertical line that is drawn at the level of GDP that is equal to what we call the potential GDP. Now, when you look at that, if in terms of a diagram, this is how it looks like. So we will draw a line that is vertical. So I'm going to make my first axis. On my y-axis, I'm going to put price level, and on my x-axis, I'm going to put my real GDP, right? And so the diagram will look like this, where according to the classical school of thought, your LRAS is a vertical line which is drawn at YF, which is your GDP, that is your potential GDP, or your GDP that corresponds to full employment. So we can say that it shows you the total um, real output that can be produced with a given level of inputs and a given level of efficiency. So it's just like PPC, that if you are on the LRAS, you are at full employment level, and therefore anytime when you're looking at being at YF, this means full employment is achieved, and that output is corresponding to that full employment level of output. Now, the classical economists are of the view that if you are in the long run, that all markets will be at equilibrium, which means basically they are making a case that there will be no spare capacity. So this is an important point. No spare capacity, which means there is no unemployment whatsoever, and that means that if there ever a rise in AD that happens in the long run, because you're already in full employment and there's no spare capacity, then there will always be a rise in price level from P0 to, let's say, P1, due to a rise in AD from AD0 to AD1. Because of the fact there is full employment that is happening, because an economy, when you say long run, according to them, the economy will be in the long run, it will be at full employment. This means that anytime there's an increase in AD, you will see only price level to rise. And the reason is very simple, because of a lack of unemployment or a lack of spare capacity, there are no resources out there that can meet that increased demand, which means the only thing that will go up will be the price level. So classical economists are of the view that in the long run, all markets will be at equilibrium. At YF, there is no spare capacity, and as a result of that, any increase in AD will increase the price level in the economy and will not increase the output. Now, the reason why they say that there is full employment to start off in the long run has to do with flexibility of wages, which is a thought that I'm going to talk about in a little while. I just want to first introduce the idea of the classical economist, um, LRAS, and how the shift takes place. And then also, I want to talk about the Keynesian view, and then we'll talk about the flexibility of wages in a little while. But if you are in full employment, and if there is no what you call it spare capacity, then clearly there is going to be only inflation that can take place in the long run, as we've seen this in this diagram, that a rise in AD is only resulting in price level to go up. Now Keynesian's view differ from that, and I want to talk about Keynesian view. Keynesian said this, that like if you're looking at long run, it's not necessarily true that there will be equilibrium to be met. In fact, they were of the argument that in the long run, unemployment can also occur, and this comes about because of the of a historical sort of event that takes place post the Great Depression. The Great Depression happened in the early 1900s, and in that we saw that the unemployment that happened was very long and painful. So a lot of people started questioning the classical view, which was saying this, that in the long run the economy will be in full employment, and people said that what, why is this that this unemployment is going on for so long? And Keynesian, or John Maynard Keynes, came up with this idea that it's not necessarily true that unemployment will happen even in the long run. It can be possible that there could be unemployment even in the long run, and he came up with this kind of a curve, which is different from the classical view. So he said that if unemployment can happen in the long run, then there could be a period of massive unemployment that can happen, or mass unemployment that can happen till, for example, let's say Y1. Then there will be a gradual sort of movement towards full employment, and then there could be a possibility of full employment where the LRAS will become vertical. So they said this, that if you look at this curve, where if I say from 0 to Y1, there is mass unemployment that can happen, then you will have a curve where even if the AD is going up, let's say from AD naught to AD1, look at this, guys. If AD is rising from AD naught to AD1, there is no change in price level, and the reason is very simple, that the AD is going up, but there is no change in price level, because the economy has what we call spare capacity available. But moving on, when the economy is nearing full employment, let's say if you are in this zone from Y1 to YF, this is called nearing full employment. So let me write this: nearing full employment. You will see the economy to find that the resources are now not that available, and the flexibility that the producers have is not that available, which means now the rise in AD will end up causing the prices to rise, because now from P naught the prices are rising, because suddenly resources are becoming scarce. But then comes a point where you are at YF, let's say 83 or 84, where you can see that the AD is going up, causing only the price level to go up. So for example, if you are at P1 before, you might be at P3 or P4 as the demand goes up. So in other words, what the Keynesians were of the view was that whether the rise in AD can cause price level to go up in the long run may be dependent on basically where you are on the LRAS. If you are in the zone of mass unemployment, a rise in AD will be easily met by a rise in output, because the economy has spare capacity to meet the increased demand. But if you are in a zone where you are at full employment, which is here, then a rise in AD can only make the price level go up with no change in output to happen, because your economy doesn't have a spare capacity to meet the increased demand. So Keynesians were of the view that in the long run, full employment is not necessarily true. There could be mass unemployment that can happen, while the classical view was more about that in the long run there is only going to be full employment. All markets will be in equilibrium, and as a result, any rise in AD will cause only price level to go up. So there is no possibility of unemployment happening in the long run. And all of this started off because of what we call the view, which was about the flexibility of wages. So flexibility of wages is the biggest disagreement that both the school of thoughts have. So let's talk about flexibility of wages. The classical economists are of the view that when you look at LRAS, LRAS is vertical primarily because the fact that all markets will be reaching equilibrium in the long run, and that is primarily because of what they believe is that wages are completely flexible. If wages are completely flexible, then basically workers are willing to take a wage cut. Now that's something which is, according to Keynesian, not true. Keynesians believe that workers are not willing to take a wage cut, and they are of the opinion that when you give somebody a wage cut, that person will become demotivated and may not want to sort of provide the same kind of productivity because of a cut in real wage, and as a result, they believe that wages are what they call the Keynesian view. Let me write this: Keynesians believe wages are inflexible downward or sticky wages. So let me write this: inflexible downwards. Another term they use is they are sticky wages. Sticky means basically not changing too much, and the reason they say is because A, the workers will refuse to take a wage cut, and B, even if workers are taking a wage cut, employers may worry about this because they think that if you give a wage cut, maybe workers will not be as productive as they were before. So this means that Keynesians say that it is not likely true that the wages are going to be flexible as the classical view. So when the classical economists are arguing here that wages are flexible, so how does that imply in terms of equilibrium? So let's talk about how the flexibility of wages results in the long run equilibrium to be achieved at full employment. So when you look at classical view, the classical economists draw this kind of a diagram. They say the LRAS is vertical. So let's draw a vertical LRAS. Okay. When your LRAS is vertical, so this is how it is. Okay. And it's meeting at YF, and this is my real GDP, and this is my price level, right? So with this kind of a LRAS, let's say the economy right now is at full employment in the long run. This is my AD naught and AS naught. And remember, according to classical economists, wages are completely flexible. So with this kind of a diagram, when you have ADAS meeting at full employment, let's say suddenly there's a rise in demand in the short run. Now we are, remember, in the long run at point A. And if there's a rise in demand in the short run, suddenly you will have a situation where the economy may need to produce beyond YF. Now, this may not be possible unless you make the existing workers to work overtime, or you make existing workers who are right now not part of the labor market and voluntarily sitting at home to somehow come back to the labor market by paying them higher wages. Now both these strategies of working overtime and attracting new workers to the market may mean you will have a rise in cost because the wages will rise because workers are now attracted to the market through higher wages. When the wages go up, remember the wages are flexible according to classical. When the wages go up, aggregate supply curve will shift backward, and that shift of aggregate supply curve means that we will come back to an equilibrium of sorts in the long run. So repeating it again, a rise in AD happens in the short run. Let's say economy want to produce more output. That in turn means going beyond the full employment, which means either make existing workers work overtime or attract new workers through paying them higher wages. Both will mean that your cost per unit may go up as the wages will start to rise. When the wages start to rise and catch up to the rise in demand, there will be a shift of aggregate supply backward, and that means economy will come back to an equilibrium to at point C, but at a price level which is going to be higher, like P1. So in short, you are in the long run at AD naught at point A, and again you will be in the long run at point C, where the rise in AD has only caused in the long run for the prices to go up because you cannot go beyond the full employment level such as Y1 in the long run. You may do that in the short run through making workers work overtime, but you may not be able to do that in the long run. Hence, the flexibility of wages will make you come back to full employment. Let's do another case. What if the AD is going down? How will that affect the long run equilibrium? So let's draw that diagram here. Take our LRAS curve, which is vertical, will show an equilibrium, and then we'll see if the fall of AD happens, what will it look like. So let's start off with AD naught and AS naught, and let's say right now we are at P naught, where the GDP is at full employment. So now I'm going to have real GDP at full employment at YF, and this is my price level. Now, if there is a fall of aggregate demand curve, if there's a fall of aggregate demand curve 81, then basically we are at a situation where suddenly the economy is suffering from unemployment because of a fall in demand, and that is also translating into lower prices. But let's focus on output only. So with this fall of output, the firms have two options. Number one, they may cut down prices by offering cheaper prices so that people can buy things at a lower price, or they can tell the workers that, listen, we have two options. Option number one is we send you home and you remain unemployed for a long time. Option number two is that we cut your wages and therefore cut our cost, and therefore try to make our good to become affordable for the consumers, which means if the wages are flexible, workers may agree to such a move and aggregate supply curve may shift to the right. So if the wages are flexible, workers may happily take a wage cut rather than sitting at home. They'll be like, you know what, if we are sitting at home, we will be unemployed. Why don't we just take a wage cut, stay employed? Aggregate supply curve will shift to the right as the cost of production goes down, and we will ultimately come back to an equilibrium at P1. So we started at A, there was a fall in AD, we went to B in the short run, and in the long run, when the employers decide to take a wage cut, or employers decide to give a wage cut to employees, the aggregate supply curve shifted to the right, causing us to come back to point C, which is where the full employment is going to happen again. So classical economists were of the argument that in the long run, we will always be at full employment because of flexibility of wages. The economy will come into equilibrium. All markets will in fact come into an equilibrium in the long run, and therefore there will never be any unemployment in the long run due to this flexibility of wages. Now Keynesian said, no, that's not true. If you look at the situation where you're looking at workers sort of well-being or workers sort of satisfaction, they may not want a wage cut, because once they get a wage cut, they know that they will be stuck with that wage for a long time, so they may disagree with the wage cut. Also, employers knows that if you give a wage cut to any employee, he may decide to basically put less effort, which means inefficiency to go up, and therefore nobody, neither the employer nor the employee, want to sort of accept or give a wage cut. As a result, there is a possibility of a long and painful unemployment to happen. So look at this, guys. This is your LRAS curve according to the Keynesian sort of view. They say this, that if you are looking at long run, the only case where economy will be at full employment will be in this zone, but very likely if there is inflexibility of wages, you will have a zone of unemployment to happen even in the long run. Hence, if you are at AD naught, and let's say if there's a rise in AD that happens, the fact that there is no flexibility of wages means that you will basically be seeing that the GDP may go up from, let's say, Y2 to Y3 without any rise in prices. So the idea goes this, that Keynesian said this, that because unemployment can happen even in the long run, then your shape of the LRAS could be very different. And they, by the way, also make another case, and that's an important case to remember. Now, let's say if you are AD naught, right, and there is unemployment happening, Because of inflexibility of wages, economy may not recover automatically. Look at this, guys. Their Keynesians are classical view is slightly different. Classical are of the opinion that, you know what, because you were at 80 naught and suddenly 80 went down, the flexibility of wages made you recover from an unemployment automatically. But classical economists says that there is an automatic adjustment that will take place. The Keynesians are of the view that there may not be any automatic adjustment that may take place because the economy will suffer from long and painful unemployment. And if you really want to come to full employment, let's say you want to make your curve go from 80 naught to let's say 83, the only way you can do that is by government intervening and government trying to make the economy recover by spending more money. Let's say government expenditure to go up, or let's say government trying to lower interest rates to make the consumption and investment to go up. So the need for adjustment is there, and therefore the need for government intervention is very strong when it comes to Keynesian economists, because they believe that the economy doesn't have the power to recover automatically. So, guys, this is our discussion for today. So, we talked about the Keynesians and the classical view. We talked about flexibility of wages. We also talked about how the shape of the LRAS is different. And lastly, we talked about how the Keynesians believe because there is no automatic adjustment that will take place in the economy, there is a need for government intervention, while classical economists believe that because the economy recovers automatically due to flexibility of wages, there is no need for government intervention. Tomorrow we will discuss a new chapter, which is from my notes, chapter number 6, which will focus on the monetary sector.